Morning did not arrive as light. It arrived as awareness. A slight shift in the dark. Barely noticeable. But felt. The man lay still beneath the weight of wool and time. Not asleep. Not awake. Listening. The cabin made its small sounds. Wood tightening. Wood releasing. The cold pressed in from every direction. Steady and patient. Like something that had learned how to wait. His breath moved slowly. Each one visible in the dim air. He did not try to hide it. There was no reason to move yet. Beside him, the woman slept. Her back turned slightly toward him. Her shoulders rising and falling beneath layers of cloth. She had wrapped herself during the night without waking fully. A habit learned long ago. The body doing what it needed. Without asking. The fire was gone now. Not recently. Hours ago. Only the memory remained. A soft gray shape in the hearth. Ash settled like dust on yesterday. He waited a little longer. In this place, mornings were not seized. They were entered. When he finally sat up. It was not sudden. The cold found his face immediately. Touched his cheeks. His nose. He accepted it. His feet moved slowly from the bed to the floor. Wood stiff beneath them. Cold carried up through bone and muscle. He stood there for a moment. Letting the body remember where it was. Outside, the world held at 30 below. Not moving. Not offering anything. Snow leaned against the cabin walls. Pressing softly. Patient. Trees stood drawn inward. Branches holding their breath. Inside, the man pulled on his clothes. One piece at a time. Each layer familiar. Wool trousers. Thick shirt. A vest worn thin at the edges. Nothing new. Nothing unnecessary. His hands moved without hurry. Buttons found their holes. Fabric settled where it always had. Behind him, the woman stirred. Not startled. Not rushed. She turned slightly. Opened her eyes. Met his gaze. No words passed between them. There was nothing to say. She sat up when she was ready. Wrapped herself tighter for a moment. Then reached for her own clothes. The cold did not frighten her. It had never surprised her. She had lived beside it too long. The kettle waited where it always did. A thin layer of ice rattling inside when she lifted it. She set it near the hearth anyway. As she always did. Not to heat it yet. Just to place it where the day would begin. The man moved to the door. Rested his hand there briefly. Feeling the thickness of the wood. The grain beneath his palm. The door opened with a sound he knew well. Not loud. Not quiet. Outside air entered the cabin. Clear. Sharp. He stepped out. Cold met him fully now. Wrapped around his face. His chest. His breath pulled inward hard. Then softened. This was how the body learned. Behind him, the woman moved through the cabin slowly. Straightening a blanket. Setting a cup on the table. The cabin held them. The cold waited. And the day began again. Cold was not something that arrived. It was something that stayed. It lived in the walls. In the floor. In the air that never quite warmed. The body learned this before the mind ever tried to name it. Outside, the man stood for a moment without moving. Letting the cold reach him fully. His eyelashes gathered frost almost at once. Tiny crystals forming, then holding. He did not wipe them away. Movement came slowly. Not to protect himself. But to begin. He crossed the packed snow near the cabin. Each step placed carefully. Not because it was slippery. But because this was how walking was done here. The axe waited where it always did. Leaned against the wall. Handle worn smooth by years of hands. He lifted it once. Not to swing. Just to feel its weight. Then he set it down again. Cold stiffened the muscles at first. Not painfully. Honestly. The first swing was never strong. It didn't need to be. Lift. Fall. Pause. Would split along lines it had already chosen. Not forced. Allowed. Each piece was stacked where it belonged. Close enough to reach. Far enough to stay dry. Time passed without being counted. Inside the cabin, the woman shook out the blankets. Not hard. Just enough. Wool responded slowly. Holding its shape. Holding warmth where it could. Her fingers were red. The skin cracked in places. Not injured. Worked. She laid bread on the table. Dense. Dark. Bread that did not ask to be eaten quickly. Bread that stayed with you. She moved the kettle closer to the hearth. Listened to the small sound of ice shifting inside. Fire was not started all at once. First came paper. Then thin kindling. Then patience. She struck the match. Shielded it with her hand. Flame appeared briefly. Then settled. She did not watch it closely. She trusted the process. Outside, the man returned with wood. Cold still clung to him. It followed him inside. He did not rush to the fire. He stood near it. Not too close. Warming was gradual. The body decided where warmth was needed most. Hands first. Face. Nothing more. They ate without speaking. The bread was heavy in the mouth. Filling. Enough. Warmth spread slowly through the chest. Not from the fire. But from food. Cold taught them this lesson early. The day continued in small movements. Wood carried. Water lifted. Clothing adjusted. No single task was important. Together, they were everything. The body did not ask for comfort. It asked for balance. Too much heat was waste. Too little was careless. Cold sharpened attention. It kept the body honest. Fear had no space here. There was no moment when survival felt dramatic. Only the steady work of staying present. By midday, the fire burned low again. As it was meant to. They let it. The cold returned to the air. Not as an enemy. But as a reminder. This was the agreement. Cold would stay. They would stay. And the body would remember how. The cold did not leave. It stayed through the morning. Through the pale stretch of afternoon. Through the long, early dark. It did not need to be announced. It was always there. Inside the cabin, time moved differently. Not slower. Just without pressure. The fire burned low now. Not because they forgot it. But because they let it. Wood was saved by habit. By knowing how long a flame could last. And how little it truly needed to give. The woman sat near the window. Not to look outside. But because the light was better there. She worked with her hands. Wool between her fingers. The same motion, again and again. Pull. Twist. Settle. Her shoulders moved with the work. Her breathing followed the rhythm. Nothing asked her to hurry. The man repaired a boot at the table. Leather stiff from cold and age. Thread thick. Needle slow. He leaned close to see his work. Not because his eyes were failing. But because this was how it was done. Outside, the world was locked in white. Snow softened every edge. Sound traveled differently. Sometimes not at all. No road noise. No distant hum. Only the quiet weight of winter holding everything in place. They did not talk about the temperature. They did not measure it. They did not name it. Cold was not something to be defeated. It was something to be lived beside. They drank from cups warmed by their hands. Steam rose briefly. Then disappeared. Meals were simple. Heavy enough to last. Plain enough not to distract. Food was not entertainment. It was continuation. The cabin itself seemed to lean inward. Logs pressed together. Corners dark and familiar. Every object had a reason to be there. Nothing extra. Nothing waiting to be replaced. When something broke, it stayed broken until it could be mended. Not because they were proud. Because this was normal. There were no bills to remember. No numbers waiting at the edge of the mind. No distant obligations pulling attention away. The day contained itself. Work ended when the light failed. Not when something demanded more. The woman set her wool aside, hands resting in her lap. The man placed the boot near the fire, not close enough to scorch. They sat together without filling the space. Silence was not absence. It was rest. Outside, the cold pressed harder as the sun fell. The cabin answered by holding. Walls thick. Roof heavy with snow. Inside, warmth gathered where it could. Near the hearth. Under wool. Between bodies that knew how to be still. Night did not feel like a threat. It felt expected. They prepared for sleep slowly. Each motion already known. Blankets layered. Clothes set aside in the same place. As always, when they laid down, the cold returned to the air, creeping back in gently. They did not resist it. Sleep came the way it always had. Not forced. Not chased. Just allowed. Morning returned the same way it always did. Not announced. Not demanded. Just a thinning of the dark. The cold was still there when they woke. It had not shifted in the night. It had not softened. It waited. The man opened his eyes and lay still for a moment, feeling where his body ended. And the cold began. He flexed his fingers beneath the blankets. Slowly. Testing. Nothing hurt. Nothing surprised him. That was enough. The woman stirred beside him. Not waking fully yet. Just adjusting. The way one does after many winters. They rose when it felt right. Not together. Not apart. The fire had gone out completely now. Only a pale outline of ash remained. Undisturbed. The cabin smelled of wool, wood, and last night's smoke. A smell that did not change much from day to day. From year to year. The man stepped outside again. The door closed behind him with the same familiar sound. A sound that told him the hinges were still holding. Snow had fallen in the night. Not much. Enough to soften what had already been there. He brushed it from the doorway. From the stacked wood. From the place where he stood. The cold reached into his chest when he breathed. He welcomed it in. Then let it go. Inside, the woman prepared the fire. She did not rush the flame. She never did. She knew which pieces of wood to choose. Not by size, but by memory. Some burned longer. Some burned warmer. Some were meant only to begin. Fire was not a spectacle. It was a companion. When it caught, she did not watch it closely. She trusted it. They ate what remained from the day before. Nothing wasted. Nothing added. The food tasted the same as it always had. Which was a comfort. Afterward, the day unfolded in small tasks. The man checked the roof from below. Looking for sag. Listening for creak. Snow was weight. Weight was time. Everything that lasted learned how to carry it. The woman tended to the interior. Sweeping slowly. Not because it was dirty, but because movement warmed the body. The broom passed over the floorboards. Once. Twice. Again. She stopped when it was enough. They spoke little. But when they did, it was practical. A word about the weather. A note about the woodpile. Nothing more. Silence filled the rest. As the light shifted across the small window, they felt the day turning. Without marking it. There was no calendar on the wall. No date to notice passing. Time lived in other places. In the shortening of daylight. In the thickening of calluses. In the way their movements required less thought each year. Cold shaped the seasons. But routine shaped them. They had lived this day before. Many times. In small variations. And they would live it again. As afternoon leaned toward evening. The fire was fed once more. Not to drive the cold away. only to make space beside it. They sat close enough to share warmth, far enough to keep it. Outside, the world held steady. Trees stood unchanged. Snow kept its quiet promise. Inside, the cabin absorbed another day. Walls remembering warmth. Beams remembering weight. Nothing remarkable had happened. And that was the point. Life continued not because it was easy, but because it was practiced. When darkness returned, it felt familiar, like a coat put on again. They prepared for night as they always had. Without discussion. Without thought. Time passed. Not counted. Not feared. Just carried. The night settled in fully this time. Thick. Unmoving. Cold pressed against the cabin from every side. From below the floor. From above the roof. It did not knock. It did not test. It simply stayed. Inside, the fire had been allowed to fade again. Not out of neglect, but trust. They knew how long warmth lingered. They knew the cabin's habits. The man added one last piece of wood. Not large. Not small. Enough. The woman folded the blankets once more. Straightening edges. Hands moving by memory alone. These were not tasks meant to impress anyone. No one was watching. They were tasks meant to close the day. They sat together for a while. Not speaking. Not listening for anything. Just being where they were. The fire cracked softly. Then less. Shadows settled into their usual places on the walls. Corners grew deeper. Familiar. Outside, the cold held steady at 30 below. It had not worsened. It had not eased. It did not need to. They prepared for sleep as they always did. Layer by layer. Wool against wool. The bed waited. Not soft, but known. They lay down without ceremony. Bodies turning inward. Sharing what warmth there was. The cold returned to the air almost immediately. Slipping back into the space they had warmed. They let it. Breathing slowed. Thoughts thinned. There was no fear waiting in the dark. No worry about what might fail. Everything that could be done had been done. The cabin stood. The roof held. The fire would return in the morning. That was enough. Sleep came quietly. Not deep. Not shallow. The kind that listens even while resting. Outside, the world remained unchanged. Snow unmoving. Trees still drawn inward. Inside, two lives continued. Without effort. Without noise. The cold did not define them. It did not test them. It simply existed beside them. And they existed beside it. Morning would come again. Not because they demanded it, but because it always had. Life remained. Not loud. Not easy. Just steady. Somewhere along the way, we learned to fear what they learned to live with. Not because the cold was kinder then, but because life was closer. Closer to the body. Closer to the day. Closer to what was enough. If stories like this help you rest your mind, if they remind you of something quiet you've always known, you're welcome to stay a while. This is Forgotten Ways, and there are many days still waiting to be remembered.